Hello and welcome to the dark side. We are so happy that you are joining us. So you join us every week. We are thankful that you're here. Hi, Mr. Storm. How you doing?
I'm great. I'm always great.
We got big energy today. Big energy. That's right. Okay, so as always, please feel free to join in the discussion. Hit like, subscribe, share with your friends, bring it on. Today's discussion is going to be intense, insane, and all of those good things. We are going to be talking about what it means to be Black. Is there a Black quota? Are there ratios? What is that? What is that thing? That's what we're discussing today. So before we get there, we always do some news stories. So, do you have any news stories you'd like to share with us today?
Yeah, there is one, and then there's one other thing I probably want to get off my chest.
Ooh.
My first, the first thing I want to mention is to do with news coming out of the UK, and that is the public order bill that is currently in the House of Lords.
The public order bill, something for me to go look up.
Yeah.
What is that? Oh, is this the one for protests that's going to be like really curbing all the ability to protest, etc.?
Well, it goes further than just curbing the ability to protest. It goes as far as criminalizing people. One of the things you could do is be charged. I've forgotten what the exact phrase they used was, but you know how protesters lock themselves to things?
That's been happening recently with some of the protests.
If you're caught carrying a lock, they can, well, jail you.
What do you mean if you're caught carrying a lock? People carry locks for all sorts of reasons, nothing to do with locking yourself.
Worse than that, if you go to a protest with a first aid kit in your bag, they can arrest you.
I'm sorry, it sounded like you said if you go to a thing with a first aid kit. That's what it sounded like you said. What do you mean a first aid kit? I've got like multiple first aid kits sometimes on me at any given time because I'm a mum, I'm a pastor, I'm a human, and you just need first aid. What do you mean you're going to jail me for what's a first aid kit got to do with? Go on.
Right?
Anyway, go on.
But it doesn't just stop there.
Oh, there's more.
They are trying to give police powers to ban people from attending protests because they want to. So you don't actually have to have a criminal record, have ever been charged with a crime or anything. And they are trying to give police powers to ban you from attending protests. Now, these things that they're trying to pass are not compatible with the European Convention of Human Rights.
No.
So this should tell you why. This should tell you why the Tories have pushed so hard to get out of Europe. This is why they have pushed so hard for Brexit. And one of their stated aims from the very beginning was because they wanted to get rid of the European Convention of Human Rights. And what they did was they dressed it up and sold the lie to people. And specifically, they targeted a certain demographic. And they said the European Convention of Human Rights was what was allowing foreigners and refugees and asylum seekers to come to the UK and not be deported. And what they said was, this is how all these people are coming in and committing crimes, and then we can't deport them, which is a lie. Because European law allows for you to deport criminals back to their countries, right?
Which they do frequently.
But they sold these people a lie. When the real, and this is what people don't understand, it's the European Convention of Human Rights that, protects your maternity leave. and
Yeah.
gives you maternity rights. It's a
Mhm.
European Convention on Human Rights that
Mhm.
gives you workers' rights,
Mhm.
and that says, well, your employer has to have a certain standard um, maintained within your workplace.
Yeah.
Has to be safe for you to go
Yeah.
to work.
Yeah.
Um, and so now we're at the point where they've managed to get out of Europe. They're trying to pass
European
legislation.
Union.
Sorry, the European Union.
Just for those who keep thinking that Britain is drifting across to Canada or something, no, they are still in Europe.
They've managed to get out of the European Union,
Mhm.
and they're in the process of withdrawing from the European Convention of Human Rights. Right? They're trying to pass legislation to get around that, to get rid of it, to bin it. Right? So they haven't even managed that process yet. But you see what their intended
Yeah.
aims are
Yeah.
already.
Eroding people's rights just daily.
Right? So when they talk about
Military state.
free speech, what free
Doesn't exist.
speech?
Yeah, it doesn't
You're not
exist.
allowed to gather. You're not allowed to
Mm,
congregate. You're not
mm,
allowed to speak your
mm,
mind.
mm,
And some of the powers that they're trying to give the police are even worse than that. And then they're trying to extend the Home Secretary's powers so that she can intervene procedurally in police investigations. Now, just understand
questions.
how open to abuse that is, because during lockdown, they were having parties in contravention of the law
Mhm.
in Downing Street. The
Mhm.
police were standing outside.
Mhm. Mhm.
So you already thought you were getting away with it.
Yeah.
Now, if you give the Home Secretary the powers to procedurally intervene
Mhm.
in investigations, how much more is it now open to abuse?
Mhm.
How much more will the powerful get away with things? And I've already told you, all the Jimmy Savile stuff about how politicians already intervened in that investigation decades ago,
Mm, mm.
right? This was known stuff. But now you will be able to do it legally.
It's insane. It's insane. So, I mean, it really does put play to the idea, I think, in some ways, and Shireen is right, it is really scary. It puts play to the idea that there is a justice system, really, and that the police are there to do their job and investigate criminal actions. Because if you were actually about stopping, solving, crime, if that was actually your goal, was to actually, aid in the prevention of crime or be there to help people after a crime has been committed, then there shouldn't be to the extent that somebody could just come in and say whatever they want. We're just gonna
Well,
overrule whatever you're doing, whatever your investigation is,
well,
because it just is completely open to abuse. Like, what is that?
more than being open to abuse, I think what you're seeing is the establishment of one of the tenets of fascism, right? Because now the police will be directly pretty much under political control
Yeah.
and subject to political interference, right? But because you also now have where they can arrest you for carrying a medical kit to a protest, you have a bicycle lock in your bag. You're essentially now policing thought
Yes.
because they don't need to establish or prove that
That you
you are going to use that lock to chain yourself
mm, mm. It's
to
just that you have
something.
it, so therefore you must be guilty. You might be
It's
guilty
just
of
that you
something.
have it,
Mm,
right?
mm,
That is enough to establish guilt in under this new proposal, and also the fact that they can carte blanche ban people who
mm,
they arbitrarily choose
mm.
from attending protests or discourse or gatherings or any of these things.
What do you mean you can just ban people?
This is one of the things that they are trying to propose under this bill, banning orders to ban people from attending protests. And that's what I'm saying. You don't need to have a criminal record to fall foul of one of these things. You don't need to have ever been proven guilty of committing a criminal act. Absolutely, Shireen. It is like the pre-crime from Minority Report.
I got questions about this idea of banning people because, like, okay, I mean, I don't want to go too deep because it's probably another show and it's worrying my brain a little bit. But like, you could use that to ban whole ethnicities from doing something, whole marginalized groups from, there will be no Polish people allowed. You could just ban a whole. I mean, what do you mean? You can just ban? What do you?
Well, the thing is, I don't think they would, under the letter of the law, be able to ban an entire group of people like that. But what they can do is ban individuals. So, for example, you and I are outspoken on issues of race, gender equality, just general equality,
banned from attending,
just humanness.
Humanness, yeah. Right. Let's all just be real.
But they could just say, well,
Storm
they're in favor of saying, well, people should be treated with value. So we don't want them to attend a Black Lives Matter protest. We don't want them to attend a women's march. So we're just going to ban them. And if they attend, it's an arrestable offense.
But
it's a criminal offense.
Like, it's not like, oh gosh. Oh, I'm twitching. Sorry, people. It's just making me twitch because it's so like, what are you saying? What is this? Okay, this is one for us to watch and keep an eye on because actually it is really disturbing.
Well, I think that the interesting thing is they tried to pass this as late amendments last year. Remember when they passed the crime and policing bill? Many of these are the late amendments that they tried to ram through the House of Lords.
And then they got kicked back.
And the House of Lords rejected them. So they've now brought them back as this public order bill.
Public order bill.
Yeah.
And we can only hope that the House of Lords kicks it back again at this point. What are our options? And we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, didn't we? About the structure of UK governments. I mean, the House of Lords can only do so much to delay, stop a law going through. Once it's passed the House of Commons, it's really done to a certain degree. Well, that's quite disturbing that all that stands between us and a vigilante state is
and this is the interesting thing. This is a really interesting thing where we're really going to see, because there is a potential for a constitutional crisis here. And that is, as we said, any law or bill passed has to achieve royal assent. As it currently stands within the UK, the biggest group of protesters that are going to be affected by this are who?
Oh, the environmental protesters, those are.
And who does Charles claim he is coming down in favor of?
Environmental issues and protesters.
So this is going to be extremely interesting, because I want to see how the lobbying goes, because I believe it still has to go back to the House of Commons after the House of Lords. Right? So it goes to House of Commons, House of Lords, and I think back to the House of Commons. Right. So it will be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, this puts all of the eggs in the basket, doesn't it, really?
Because I'm pretty sure there's going to be a lot of changes made. I think it's going to pass because the Tories have a large enough majority in the House of Commons to force it through. But I think there's going to be a lot of changes made before it actually makes its passage.
Well, I guess we will watch this space here on the dark side, and y'all can keep us posted. We'll keep looking, and we'll see how we get on, because this is going to be interesting. The UK are in for a rough ride of it. Okay, well, Thank you for that news story today. It's quite disturbing. Okay, all right. I'm just gonna hold that one. The only story I have, well, I had a couple of others, just interest stories. Oh, you have more.
Well, I said there was one other thing I want to get off my chest.
Oh yeah, one other thing. I forgot about that.
It does taste different, you know. It's a subtle taste, but it does taste different. Anyway,
Oh, your special edition Tyrannosaurus Rex drink. Yes. Okay,
yeah,
that's good.
yeah.
Hmm.
Other drinks are available, people.
Other drinks are
I
available,
ain't
like
get
I
paid
said.
for this.
Yeah. That's why I got called a Tyrannosaurus Rex drink. Hey, nobody's sponsoring us, so we're just okay. So, what you want to get off your chest?
Right. I want to get off my chest the arrogance. I'm really getting peed off, to put it politely, with the arrogance of white Westerners regarding the World Cup in Qatar,
Okay.
especially British people who
Okay.
keep harping on about Qatar shouldn't have the World Cup because of its human rights abuses, because it doesn't treat LGBTQ people right, etc., 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 etc. It lacks workers' rights. It all of this,
Hmm.
and I think for me, I don't think Qatar should have been given the World Cup either
Okay.
for these reasons.
Hmm.
However, the same people calling out Qatar
Hmm.
failed to call out the UK. For the past 12 years, there has been a Tory government that has underseen the erosion and eradication of workers' rights that hasn't been seen in generations.
Hmm.
There has been an erosion of civil liberties. I just spoke about some of the legislation that they're trying to pass through.
Hmm.
They have overseen the return of stop and search. They have, which has been proven to disproportionately affect Black people. We have seen Brexit and the increase of racially
Racial
motivated
profile.
attacks,
Hmm.
right? We have had their treatment of refugees and asylum seekers,
Hmm.
right? Where they wanted to push them back into troubled waters,
Hmm.
right? All of these things that you speak of
Hmm.
are taking place in the UK. But the UK held the Euros just a few years ago,
Hmm.
and not a person said, well, the UK shouldn't have it because of these
Destroy
things.
this record too.
And I think when you look at what's happening in the UK, right, one of the reasons they said Qatar won the World Cup. We all know it won the World Cup because brown envelopes were handed out, right?
Anyway, keep it going.
No,
Let's not
but
get into libel.
just
Let's not get
no.
into
It's not libel. It's not libel. Sepp Blatter went to jail for corruption. There's a whole bunch of FIFA vice presidents that went to jail or are under investigation for corruption. So there's no libel here,
libel.
right? These are established facts.
Okay.
So, but one of the reasons they said was, well, we want to give it to Qatar in the hope that we can encourage them to improve their records on human rights.
Hmm.
Now, since Qatar have won that bid, right? In the UK, as I said, we've seen the erosion on workers' rights, we've seen the erosion of civil liberties, we've seen all sorts of things. They want to get rid of the European Convention of Human Rights, yada, yada, yada.
Hmm.
Since that has happened in Qatar, what you have seen is actually an improvement in workers' rights,
Okay.
right? It's poorly enforced, but the legislation for it exists,
Hmm. Hmm.
right? What you have seen is an improvement in women's rights. So they pretty much needed chaperones to go everywhere. They've loosened a lot of restrictions in regards to women needing chaperones and whatever. And so when you look at it, I look at it and say, well, if we were to look at the needle of progress, in Qatar, it's moving in the right direction, albeit slowly,
It's heading
right?
across.
But in the UK, it's in reverse. And
Hmm.
yet nobody has called out the UK. Look at the US in regards to how they treat people over there, right? Nobody's saying the US shouldn't be holding major tournaments. Don't get me started on France and its race relations, right? So if we start talking about all of these things here, and forget, when we get into religious persecution in France, it's a whole different level, especially if you're Muslim. So we don't have these countries being called out. And the question then it goes back to why. And so for me, it's just something that I find extremely maddening. For that and a whole list of other reasons, and I don't want to take up the entire show. But I think more people need to be mindful of what's being said. And I think also another thing that really is ticking me off is you have LGBTQ protesters going to Qatar to protest, right? Nobody's telling them stay at home. Nobody is telling them that's not the right way to do it. Now is not the right time. But when you have Black Lives Matter protesters, people protesting for racial equality out in the streets, now's not the right time. This isn't how you do it. You're only going to alienate people. Well, if you go over to Qatar and you protest in direct contravention of the law, I don't think that's going to win you friends.
Nope.
Right? But this same brigade is now supporting this. Right? And here's the thing. LGBTQ people going over to protest, hey, go for it. Have at it. I don't care. If something's not right, it's not right. For me, as I said, there isn't a time or place that you could say is suitable to protest. Or no, sorry. The time and place that is suitable to protest is always and everywhere injustice occurs. Right? So you want to go over to Qatar and protest. I don't want people to misunderstand and saying, I'm saying don't go and do it. I'm calling out the people that are talking.
In the same breath, will turn around and say to a Black person, I'm sorry, but it's not appropriate for you to do that. Sports are not events that you should do that at. This is sport. Play the sport. Don't.
Well, you saw that at the Euros with players taking the knee.
Yeah, this is sport. Well, you see that in the UK when the players have been taking the knee for over a year now, and people are like, well, we don't think that this is appropriate. This is a sporting match. Events of sporting natures are not times to protest. You need to take it up at a different area, different time. This isn't the way, blah, 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 blah. But of course, on the other side of your mouth, you're applauding majority white protesters who are going to a brown country to tell them how to do things.
As I said,
whether I agree with said brown country or not, so to speak, but that's the narrative.
No, but you're absolutely right. And when I look at this, I look at it and I can't help but think this is a colonial mentality and the colonial masters returning to ex-colonies and telling them how to operate and how to behave.
Well, it's really interesting. I mean, I don't want to labor the point too much, but I think there's a documentary actually that came out at the Commonwealth Games. So for the Commonwealth Games, the diver Tom Daly, who represents the UK, did a documentary looking at the rights of LGBTQIA plus people around the Commonwealth. And when he starts the documentary, he of himself says he was quite, all right, we just go there and we tell them this is what they've got to do. This is unacceptable, or we ban them from performing. And, he was very hard line about it. But he said what he wanted to do was go and actually talk to athletes, talk to people in their own country about their own cultures and about what they did. And what we saw at the end of the piece was his realization that you can't, as a person living in the UK, turn up in someone else's country and tell them how to do things. You can only amplify their voices. And he really has quite a journey. And I think if you're interested in these kinds of subjects where we're looking at what does it mean to support protest around the world, what does it mean to be involved in helping people to become free in their own countries, in their own spaces? What does that look like? It's a nice starting point. It's not perfect, don't get me wrong. It's not by any stretch of the imagination. But it was a really nice starting point for people who have not got a clue what it means for a colonial nation to sit in that seat and then turn around and tell Qatar, Trinidad, whatever country we're to, India, etc., this is what we think you should be doing, and we're going to penalize you for it, or we're going to come in and tell you what to do, when they're on their own journey and you don't have a right to do that. This is their country. And how do you actually support change and promote change in a way that's actually supportive of the people in their environment, and not you as an outsider coming in and enforcing your will on other people, particularly since a lot of these countries, you enforced your will, and that's why they are the way they are today. LGBTQIA laws around the globe were enforced by European countries. So it's not like they didn't exist in those places beforehand, but now you want to go in and tell them that they're wrong because you've had an awakening. We're really happy for you, you've had an awakening, but you have to then support the people on the ground to do what they are doing and not enforce your will because you created the mess in the first place. So yeah, that's just in support of your point, I guess I would say.
Okay.
I feel like I've squashed your whole point.
No.
Well, to that end, I guess we'll move on to our main topic tonight. Thank you for your news stories. They are news stories because even though it's getting something off your chest, I think it's an important one because we will be hearing lots more about the World Cup because we have an avid football fan on this.
Just on another note, I have to verify this because I'm pretty sure I was listening to something the other day, and somebody said that in one of these countries, they're so opposed to the World Cup that you cannot find, or has been banned, to sell merchandise, World Cup merchandise, and it's not being broadcast.
I'm sorry, pardon, what? In one of who countries?
One of these European countries.
Oh, we're gonna have to look that one up. Anyone know? Put that in the comment section. I beg you do. And I need to know which country that is. What? Nobody's doing that.
I just thought to myself,
there's some
imagine
blatant
if one of these
hypocrisy there.
countries took the same stance towards Hollywood on issues of racial injustice.
I would have liked to take a stance against Trump when he was coming, but they didn't manage that. I'm like, dude, you all put out fanfare and everything. I'm like, what were you talking?
Imagine if, they took the same stance to ensure that Israel didn't remain in contravention of UN resolutions against it.
Imagine if they took the same stance against Britain, who is in contravention of UN laws in
the Chagosians.
The Chagosians in Kenya and all those the other places that they're in contravention, because there's a number of countries in which the UK is in contravention of UN legislation. Like, hello, imagine. Come on now.
Absolutely.
What you saying? Come on. Anyway, you know what? Let's not do that today, shall we? Just imagine. Well, if anyone knows which European country has decided not to.
It's one of the European ones.
What country, let's just say country, has decided not to broadcast the the Euros or the World Cup, or sell any of the merchandise or allowance? Well, okay, Lord, that's an interesting one. Okay, so on to our main subject tonight, which is hailing from social media, because social media provides such a stomping ground of questions that have come up. No, in fairness, this is probably back to a classic. What happens?
Oh gosh. Oh gosh. I just had to Google. I'm sorry, on the previously, I just had to Google. It's funny. It's absolutely funny. So
That's
I couldn't. I haven't gotten to which one it is, but one of the first things that came up, first news articles that came up, was that you know how they have the fan parks and the big screens to show the matches. Guess which country is not going to broadcast on big screens like that and have the fan parks because of concerns over the rights of migrants and migrant workers in Qatar.
Please don't tell me Britain, because that would
No,
be
Britain wasn't on that list,
well, that's good
but
to know.
I'm sure it might be at some point.
I would call hypocrite every living day of the week if you're gonna be hypocrite.
No,
What
but it's just
people, is it like Italy or somewhere who's literally just come up with
almost close. You're close.
Go on and put us out of our misery. Which one?
France. I had to laugh. I had to laugh at this.
I'm like, didn't we cover France in an earlier podcast on this whole issue of how you treat your undocumented illegal workers? What are you talking about? Shh, please. You just didn't want to put up no fan parks. Just be honest. We don't want to do it, so we're gonna use any excuse here because it's not about ethics, that's for sure, and it's certainly not about how we treat our workers because that ain't
no. But it is it's about them pointing the finger at everyone else to avoid scrutiny of themselves. But anyway, look, I interrupted you again. Sorry, carry on. I just thought it was funny.
Okay, there we go. All right, so we're never going to get to this topic. So anyone who's joined in for this topic, I'm just going to say this is going to be like a drop in the water, and you're going to have to come back next year when we do our Black History Month on this subject because we ain't covering nothing today. We only got half an hour to do it. Oh, thank you. Thank you, Tracy. A great example of a main point. Yeah. But we are going to look at what is Black on the, and we're looking at what the quotas are. And the reason for this comes from social media. So I follow Dr. Raquel Martin. She's a psychologist, PhD. Super brilliant to follow. She gives loads of information on your healing journey, on parenting, on decolonialization, on anti-racism, on any subject, but pretty much any subject. She's like a complete book fiend, and she has a great book list. She just is quite brilliant. But this week she went into the world of all things social media, and somebody was complaining about a woman, a Black woman, was using the product Skims. Now, it's not my thing, so I didn't know. And she was like saying, "Oh, look, and it looks great, and it's shapewear and blah blah blah." She's doing this thing. Anyway, the long and the short of it is the criticism came in to this Black woman. Why don't you buy from a Black-owned brand? And so Dr. Raquel Martin said, "Don't you all know that Skims is a Black-owned brand, and the Black person is Emma Grady. I hope I've said that name right. Or Grade, I'm not sure. And she put up a picture of this beautiful Black woman who is part owner of the brand Skims alongside some other people, including the very famous Kardashians. Okay. Now, this then brought about a whole barrage. And when I say barrage, I mean it was insane. This thing blew up on her page, and she always has really great commenters and really great interactions, but this time it went crazy. People were questioning the Black woman's identity. They were saying she's not Black enough because she was raised by a white mother. She's not Black enough because she's married to a white person. She's not Black enough because she's in bed with the Kardashians. She's not Black enough because 1,000,001 different reasons. And then came some really heartbreaking stories from mixed people, biracial people, who were saying, you know, there was a Nigerian, half white person who said, "I actually have a business." And it was a jewelry business, and she was promoting that to her friends. And the one particular Black friend said, "Yeah, but I mean, I only buy from Black people. So, like, who are you partnered with?" And she was like, "So I'm not enough. So I'm partnered with my mum." And she said, yeah, but you're mixed. So it's like your mum, the white parent or the black parent. And she was so horrified that she was like, she felt like she just lost a friend that day because of this. And as a not obviously black person, the question of what is black has stuck with me somewhat over my lifetime. And in recent years, with the rise of terms like passing and other things, it has really come to the forefront of my mind to really look at this, because I think that, oh, I don't know how to say what I want to say. Help me out, Mr. Storm. I don't know.
Just say what you want to say, innit?
I don't know how to process this one. But I think it's a really tough subject. Like, it doesn't sit easily with me, and I feel uncomfortable talking about it. But because I've always been mindful that my experience as a not obviously black person is very different to an obviously black person's experience. And so therefore, I don't speak for the obviously black person, right? I don't speak for your experience. And so when we're talking about this, it brings up really horrible feelings of the one black drop rule. It brings up issues of people calling you half caste or mulatto, or all kinds of half blood, half breed in the Netherlands, you get called, and all kinds of other terms which are really derogatory and not very nice. It brings up feelings of rejection from, if you are not obviously black person or a mixed person, you end up in this space where you're not black enough for black people and you're not white enough for white people. So you sit in this no man's land and you are trotted out depending. But it also raises questions about what is black enough. Because I remember when Halle Berry won the Oscar, first black woman to win an Oscar, and the next day, she's not really black though, so we're still waiting. From our own community, from her own people, right? And you have this barrage of history of dependent, it feels like, on which way the wind blows, will depend. And then we can't help but say, then there are people who race bait, of course. And that's become a huge part of modern culture, is race baiting and cultural appropriation. And you've got Rachel Dolezal, who I could have personally strangled for the trauma this woman inflicted on my life. And she don't even know me, but she was just traumatic. So what is black? Who qualifies what is black? What is this term? Where does it come from? Why do we have it? What does it mean? What are we doing right now? That's kind of the thing.
I think the real sad thing is that people are squabbling over whether this person or that person is black enough. And the people that are squabbling over it fail to understand that they don't have the agency to define that. Because you are only as black as the white person sitting in the room says you are. And I say this because, one, black isn't a binary thing. It's a scale. Right? And so that means whoever holds the power dynamics gets to determine where on that scale you are. Mm-hmm. I spoke about the story just the other week where the guy said to me about me and my brother, but you're Arab. He's black. Right? I have had white people look at me in my face and tell me, but you're not really black. Right? It's because those people feel that they hold the power dynamics. Right? And so what we people who tend to squabble over this fail to understand that this is a divide and conquer measure. And so what would happen is if I am in the room with Wesley Snipes, right? Okay. Say he didn't have the money, right? And he wasn't famous, right? Just a regular Joe.
Mhm.
Chances are I'm going to be treated better than he is.
Yeah.
And that is
True.
purely because of my complexion. And I
Mhm.
recognize the privileges that that benefits me and affords me,
Mhm.
which is why I always say that it's my position to speak up in those spaces
Mhm.
to enable and advocate for people who are darker than me to have their own agency in those spaces,
Mhm.
right? But what we are not realizing is that when Wesley is not in the room, I am Wesley.
Right.
So, as much as we're here squabbling, you're not black enough, you're not black enough, you're not black enough, we don't have the agency to define what black is for ourselves.
Mm. Mm.
We don't get to define who is black. It is always those that hold the power that will determine where on the scale we are. And they will do that based upon their needs. And this is a power and control measure. So
Mhm.
instead of us saying, hey, you know what? How you treated Wesley ain't right. How you treated me ain't right. We don't want to be treated like this.
Mm.
It's you're treated better than me. I want to be treated like you. When you're failing to understand, you shouldn't want to be treated like me. You should be wanting to be treated like the person who holds the power and authority.
Mhm. 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 So a number of questions have come in. One is blackness a self-defining measure?
No.
I say we can do this historically. So we can actually do this historically. So I have some research in front of me. So if we look at terms like mixed race or biracial and black, what we can see is their progression through the legal system of the United States. And so what has happened is even though we people may adopt or reject, the people being labeled may adopt or reject a title, what happens is that it's actually legally done. And so we see the rise of terms like black and mixed race, or mixed race and biracial coming through in the 1950s. That's the beginning of those terms. And so before then, you were referred to as mulatto, you were referred to as
Octroon, it had all sorts of
quadroon,
terms.
yeah, quadroon, and all kinds of other codes, or simply on site, you presented as, and thus you were,
Mhm.
or one drop rule, because we know you have it in you, you simply are black. So that progression of the titles or the labeling actually comes from um, the system. So is it self-defining? No, to a certain degree, it never has been self-defining because it comes through within the legal framework of the census. It comes through within the legal framework of how people are measured, counted, and called, and how who holds the power to label and do that is white people.
Well,
And so there is a progression for that,
I, I,
and
ju-
there
I,
is
ju-
an
I just
obviously.
I just want to interject here and supplement what you're saying in terms of it. It's not a self-defining thing. When you go back to the origination of it, Linnaeus, and there was another person at the time separately coming up with similar idea of how to classify people. Um, remember, these are the people that came up with the concept of black and white and the different races.
Mm, mm, mm.
It wasn't you or me or people that looked like us or darker that defined these terms
No,
and then put them in place.
no,
So we are simply living within the system and tools
that
that were
someone else
placed
has
upon
defined.
us.
Yeah.
And then what happens is we are trying to define ourselves within a system that is not designed for us to define ourselves.
Yes. And we see that very much within, so I'm always mindful when I say this, because there is a lived experience, but there is also a lived experience of the words that we're using, right? So we can classify ourselves into different ways. There is ethnicity, nationality, race, and culture, right? So you can be a nationality based on where you were born. So a person can just, I would identify with my country of birth as my nationality. So I say, my children and I have a very fun discussion over whether mummy or daddy says the same thing about our nationality, but we have so I would say British. But I remember times when looking at the census for Britain, when that comes out every however many years it's done, how the actual labeling of people has changed over time and what's been added, taken away, and the classifications and categories. And if you've ever done an ethno research for sociology or something like that, you will have noticed that there is huge shifts in the way that's being classified and done. And that actually comes into the language of people. And so there are conversations surrounding things like terms like BIPOC in the States. Can people say Black, Indigenous, people of color? Is that the term that people want to use? But those terms have come about because of how the classifications of people have worked on a national level. And then the conversation that's happening about self-determining or self-defining is happening within the system of what we've been given. And so there's this idea that those things are different. And I think, to be clear, when we talk about race, it is a social construct. It is something that was created in the way that we're using those terms. It does not speak to ethnicity. It does not speak to nationality. It does not speak to culture. It purely really does relate to a place, time when it was created way back when, to enslave one people and make one people a majority. And so in creating white, they created other terms underneath it. And as those people have rebelled, as those people have sought freedom, those terms have changed accordingly. So what you were called originally is not what we're called now officially. But so once you've created this idea of whiteness, then everything else got labeled within that. And you see that with the stratering in South Africa, you see it within the UK, you see it within America. There are certain terms that go across those places because of colonization. And I think to have a conversation about what is Black free from the history of why we even have Black seems a bit naive to me, but that's just me. So yeah, hide current comment. Let me see what's happening here. So we have another question. Let's see. Somebody asked if you're really Arab. That's hilarious.
Well, it depends where in the world I am. That's just the reality of it.
Well, anyway, I'll tell you a story about Arab later. So racism is often a uniting part of the Black experience, and unfortunately is often perpetuated by the Black people to maintain that privilege that they got when Wesley is in the room. Colorism is a real thing. So colorism is a part of racism, right? It's the bad child of racism. It's the thing that we've all been conditioned to believe. And colorism spans every continent. If you look at every continent, if there have been white people in those places, if there've been colonization in those places, you will see that skin lightening creams, etc., etc. So if you think about where our skin, let's just go with skin lightening creams, where are those most prevalent, where they sold the most? India, right? And people are like, I don't understand, because the way that racism, the way that works is it becomes internalized to the people that it's being done to. And so it's not just about racism as an external force and it only affects white people who can be racist, but the people who are being oppressed by the system also internalize that sense of themselves, because all the images they see are of light, bright, you want to say. And so therefore that's the thing they're aspiring to become like. And the
And
closer you get to that, the more rejected you become from the group that don't look like that as well.
but I think we also need to bear in mind, because you mentioned India and some of the Asian countries that do that. But I think we also need to bear in mind the process that took place in a lot of the Latin American countries. Blancamento. My Spanish is non-existent, so I'm probably not even pronouncing it right. But the process in which they brought and allowed more and more Europeans to come over to whiten the population. And the
That was
concept
really
was
scary. We
we're going
watched
to
a documentary
breed,
on that.
we're going to breed uh,
The black out of
the
people.
melanin out of the people because we believe white is better. And they didn't want black people
Right.
to hold power.
Right. And
So
you
I
see
think,
that throughout.
you speak of whitening
Mm.
creams, but I think
There's
it's
also
displayed in
literal
many,
many different
many, many
forms.
forms.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So Shireen's asked a question here. I agree with that. But then what about defining our community for ourselves, particularly in the US, North America?
You can tackle it first if you want.
No, by all means, you go.
I think I think there's a real comfort in how we have defined blackness and our communities within blackness within the structure that we have as it exists today. In terms of before I came to the Netherlands, didn't matter what country I was in, I could give another black person the nod and get the nod in return. It was an acknowledgement. Hey, we are kin, we are community. I see you, brother. You see me.
Mm.
Um, but there's also a real danger
Mm.
in doing it and defining our what we classify as our community in
Mm.
terms of race, especially since we don't hold the power dynamics. And we see that every time a news story comes on TV that's negative, we're like, please God, don't let him be black. Please God,
Oh,
don't let him be black. Because our community has been defined in that way. So
mm.
we take it on board that when another black person somewhere,
Mm.
anywhere,
Mm.
does something wrong, that is reflective of us because we are part of that community. And so there's a real danger that comes in defining our communities in these ways and in these terms. And I think what we need to get back to is a much older concept of community, which is my community is my neighbor. My community is my street. My community is my village. My community is the people that live in proximity to me, whose lives I can impact and
Mm.
who will have an impact on my life.
Mm.
And I think once we do that, I think not just black people, but I believe the world will be in a much better position than it is.
Okay. Okay. So that's one way of tackling the question. So
Well, I mean, feel free
I'm gonna jump in on a different way of tackling the question, maybe. Because we've had this discussion a few times, I think, and we will continue to have this discussion
no, but
on.
we if you disagree, please.
No, I agree with you in a grand principle. So on a grand scale, I agree that if I can define myself by my local neighborhood, by my local community, if I can actually be a part of that community, then should my the social construct that bound us to a power dynamic that is toxic can be released, because I'm no longer competing with my neighbor or fearful of my neighbor or what have you. I'm building trust and I'm building a working relationship. And I do believe in that in the ideal. I really, really do. Living with the construct that we have, I remember having a massive, massive, massive discussion with you over the fact that I couldn't, I found it very difficult to part with my label of black, and I found it really difficult for people to call me passing, white, privileged, and all kinds of other names, right? So I remember this discussion because I was just, and you were like, we're gonna have to destroy white and black. That's what we're gonna have to do. We're gonna have to let these things go. And I was like, but if we let go of our black, then what am I? What am I then? Because I have been black my whole life. What am I gonna be if I let that go? Who am
You can
I?
be anything you want.
Right, and I remember that part of the discussion too. But here is a thing that I think maybe lies behind Shireen's question. I can't speak for her. Maybe I should just talk about myself. Maybe this isn't your question, Shireen. But here is my thing. In some ways, I was never given a choice. So what I've heard about people in my generation and younger who are mixed is that they had a choice to pass as something else, right? I never had that choice. I was raised by a single black woman in a very poor neighborhood, and I was black. That was it. I was the black kid. That I didn't, there was not another definition for me. And I didn't want another definition, and I didn't look for another definition. And my mother was very pro-black. That was her stance. There was no other way. She researched everything she could about black people, and she was entrenched in Caribbean heritage, upbringing, history, colorism. The whole thing was part of her DNA. But she was also Marcus Garvey, Malcolm X, reading everything she could, educating herself, getting degrees in history, politics, trying to understand the construction she was living within, and being very, very pro. So I myself have always experienced the world as her daughter, as the daughter of a very proud black woman. That is how I have experienced the world. And that has come at the cost of losing jobs, losing friends, losing all sorts of things. I've paid the price for that. And I wouldn't change it for the world. And I remember when you said, yeah, but you have privilege. I was like, what privilege? When did I see that? What are you talking about? And I've come to understand that I have privilege, and I've come to accept it. And I've come to use it to speak out and against the kind of racial construction that we have. But I also recognize that that identity, that struggle comes from somewhere. Having recently done a DNA test and recently seen, particularly where my African heritage comes from, the parts of the world that it comes from, the parts of Africa, the countries, and knowing about the African continent, knowing about those countries, feeling very deficient when they said, you have West African. I was like, yeah, but what does that mean? What nation are you talking about? What people group? What language? Give me something. And recognizing that unlike other groups on earth, children of the African diaspora, wherever we be we in the Caribbean, be we in the United States, be we have our bombs in Brazil or South America, or wherever we are, we have been stripped of language, of people, of culture, of heritage, of ethnicity. We've been stripped of nationality. We've been stripped of and given this label race. That's all we have.
Yeah.
Because what binds us together is the emptiness of not recognizing. You know, the list of African nations was wonderful to see, and it really helped me because I was like, see, I'm black, really. Right? I was so excited when that piece of paper came in, but I was also devastated because I realized how deficient that little piece of paper was. What flows through my veins, the blood that flows through me, are the ancestors of the slaves that survived the torture, the Holocaust, the horror of slavery. What flows through my veins are a people who lost everything to colonization, and all that we had was the culture that we created for ourselves, were the bits and pieces that we claimed. We're not the N-word. We're going to claim Negro until we can find something better. We're going to claim African American, African something, Bayesian, whatever, till we find something that defines who we are better. Because in that definition, there is a understanding of the stripping of all that we were to what we are to be now. And while I love the idea of being from my local area,
Mhm.
right, with my neighbors, with my people. I love that idea. I live in a world in which I was never given that choice. My ancestors were never given that choice. In fact, that
Mhm.
choice was completely stripped away from them.
Yeah.
And so there is a part of me that wants to hold my Black identity because of that, but also
And
wants to hold my Black identity in opposition to a white identity.
right.
Until you dismantle white, I will forever remain Black, because that identity has corrupted Dutch, English, French.
Look,
Because you come
the reality is, once again, whether you want to claim it or not, and whether I believe in it or not, we are black once again, because it comes back to the fact that we don't get to define these things for ourselves. So I understand your position and where you're coming from. I'm
from.
simply saying that in regards to how we define communities, if we want to dismantle this concept of whiteness, we have to start to define community in a real practical sense to bring about this change. And yes, look, here's the reality. No matter where I am in the world, besides the Netherlands, right?
Oh, we could
I
do a
will
show
look,
on the Netherlands on racism. Come on.
I will look at another black person, give them the nod, and get the nod in return. Right? But what you have to understand is we are worlds apart.
Yeah. Yeah.
What I'm saying to that black person is, I see you, brother. I see and recognize your struggle and that you are surviving it.
Yeah.
You see my struggle and recognize I am surviving it. But culturally, we could be a billion miles apart.
Which
Right?
then touches on something else.
Right. So what I'm saying to you is, when we look at these things, it's not actually the concept of race or color that's holding us together.
No.
It's not that I'm recognizing in a fellow black person when I see them,
Mm.
right? Because I don't want to be defined solely by my struggle. And if you gave me the choice today between whether I want to be black or Bermudian, I'm taking Bermudian every day of the week.
Well, that's true. I
Right?
remember the conversation ended with, well, I guess I could say that I'm Bayesian, right? That was like the
Yeah.
conclusion of the I am from Barbados. That's where that's what I'm holding to right there. But I
Right?
recognize for some people they don't have that, right? And we can feel proud of our islands because I think our islands were fought and died for to be independent,
Right.
kind of.
And I recognize that. So I want to come back, but I want to come back to Shireen's question about defining community for themselves as it relates to the US and North America.
Okay.
I believe, as I said, if you gave me the choice of what to choose between black and Bermudian, I would choose Bermudian. And I think that when it comes to people within North America, I would say to you, choose to be a citizen of the USA. Right? And I say this deliberately because as long as you allow them to define you and continue to allow yourself to be defined by the term of African American, they will continue to other you as much as possible. And what you are subconsciously doing is othering yourself. Right? Because the reality is, as much as you want to, okay, Bermuda is tiny, it's a dot, right? St. David's is completely different to Somerset, and the island's a dot, right?
It's true.
But we are all Bermudian,
Mhm.
and we acknowledge the differences within that, and we'll be like, "Yo, them people down the country are strange, right? We ain't big enough to have a country. We barely big enough to have a village, but we'll be the and people down the country are strange, right?
Listen,
So
far
you
in
have to
Bermuda is a
understand.
funny thing, yeah.
You have to understand when it comes to the US, and you're talking about African American, and you're talking about white people, and you're talking about Southern. Look, the culture from state to state changes,
Culture
right?
for, what is it like?
But one
Things
thing
that
that
say,
will persist is that there will be a unifying national trend of identity that runs through you. That wherever you go in the world, somebody will turn around and say, "You're from the US."
it's not always a compliment, though.
No, but the
But you
reality
know, we
is,
know you're from America. We know you're from the US.
somebody will be able to recognize that within you. And so
True,
what I'm saying is, if Bermuda, as small as it is, has those differences, then you have to expect those differences
Mm,
within a country of the landmass of the United States,
mm.
right? But one thing we do not do is deny the inherent Bermudianness of those people.
Right. But in some ways, I guess what you're saying is, I can only liken it to the Black British experience, right? Because as a Black British person, I grew up in a community that defines itself in its Caribbeanness. I'm from Barbados. If you ask me where I'm from, I'm not going to lead with British. I'm going to lead with Barbados. That is how our community identifies itself. And the more different diaspora countries that we have, then came in the more different African nations that we've had. We define ourselves first and foremost by our island or country before we do that. But what that does is distances ourselves from the place that you're actually physically born into. And so I remember having another discussion with you about whether I would define myself as English, and I would say no. But you're born in England. But I will define myself as British, but I will never define myself as English. Why is that? What is it, the underlying things that I'm saying that goes to that? And within white people, within Britain, there is the same conversation about whether they define themselves as British or Scottish, British or English, British or Welsh, because of some of the inherent things that go with saying you're English. Right? They don't match up, right? And so I can only imagine that in the USA that distancing happens as well. Like, it puts distance between you and your neighbor. It puts distance between you and the governing systems at play, because I ain't trying to be
right. And I think there is a difference, that I need to acknowledge within the US, is that Black people are still a minority, and in Bermuda, Black people are the majority. But we need to. What I want to say is that Bermuda has problems with race. It has had problems with race. It was originally called the Bermuda Company. Okay. And they were shipping in Black people for slaves. In fact, one of the first, if not the first, or one of the earliest written accounts by a slave was actually done by a Bermudian. And so you have to look, there's a long legacy and history of racial injustice in Bermuda that we fought for, right? But I think what defines us the most when you look at it, and I think a good example to bring about, is Flora Duffy.
Oh, this is the triathlete?
The triathlete. She won the Olympics in the world.
Yes.
She's a world champion and a Olympic gold medalist.
Mm-hmm.
And she's a white person. And she had the opportunity to run and represent the UK. And she said, no, I choose Bermuda. This is my home. This is where I grew up. These are the people that supported me. All of these things. This is who I'm going to represent. She had the opportunity to choose power, prestige, fame, all of these things that would have come with choosing the UK, but she chose Bermuda, right? And what you have to recognize is that in doing so, it's also rejection of whiteness. In choosing a majority Black nation that is small, as opposed to a powerful white one, it's actually rejection of the actual system. right? And what she's saying is, it's not my whiteness and the power that is going to define me. It is my community. And my community are those that supported me from ground zero.
Mm.
So, yeah, as I said, when it comes to the US, there's a whole bunch of things at play. It's a whole conversation in and of itself, I believe. Um, but I think we need to, if we're going to do these things, we need to look at redefining our communities beyond the concept of color. As I said, there's a comfort in it, but there's also a danger in it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think for me it's a really hard question because, like, you even talked about the black nod, which I never do ever, because of course I recognize that I'm not obviously black, and so it's only after you speak to me that you'll very quickly identify, what's going on here? Something's wrong. Something's up. You don't place me very easily, and so I get that. So I don't have that experience, but I do have the constant experience of being othered wherever I am. Doesn't matter which country I'm in, I'm othered to something else, right? And having that lived experience of being othered, and then people going, oh, that's what it is. Oh, you're black. Oh, I got it. Your mama's okay. And people having that constant experience, you quickly learn what identity actually means to people. What does it mean to have commonality of identity? There are things about my identity that allow people to be free in my presence or comfortable in my presence. There's also things about my identity that allow people to feel shut down and uncomfortable. And I think that when we talk about the identity of being black, you can't, in my mind, it's not possible to narrow it down to one thing, right? And the reason for that is because black is not a monolith. We've already talked here about the African diaspora, which is a term I use quite frequently on the show, and it's for all peoples outside of the African nations who were taken outside of Africa, trafficked during the slavery period. That is the African diaspora. That was the definition for it. And when we look at that, the term black has come to represent that. But what it means to be black in Bermuda, Barbados, Brazil, Spain, Britain, the Netherlands, India, China, Australia is a very culturally different thing. And within that culture, black is again not a monolith. There's not one story that typifies what the black experience is, what my experience of being black is compared to what your experience, compared to what Wesley's experience, compared to what Shireen or someone else's experience of being black is. Really is such a broad spectrum. And then within that, you get things like, oh, but you talk in white. What does that even mean? What does it mean to talk white? What does it mean to have these terms labeled at you? And then you have things like being mixed as an identity only coming into existence within really popularity the last 20 or so years. How has that detracted, added, how has that compounded issues? Is black an experience that is limited only to oppression and to the fact that we are the children of Africa without having a specific region, country, or place to tie ourselves to, or language? What does that look like? How does that actually work in practice? Because, as much as some Black Americans would like to distance themselves, Candace Owens and others, from what they consider to be the Black experience, should no one recognize them, you're still going to get treated in a certain kind of way. So is it only ever tied to your black, to the negative? Is there a positive? Are there things that tie us together positively? And I think, there are things throughout the diaspora that you hear that the stories and commonality is that bonds us together in joy as much as in tragedy. But we can often focus on the fact that it is the obvious experience of being of African descent outside of Africa, taken there and trafficked through slavery, and through all of the negative things that come with that, that is often the defining factor. And I think that then gives a challenge to positively constructing your identity. Because if you're only ever constructing an identity out of a negative, then it's wrong. Like there's always going to be a challenge with your identity, right? It can't only be taken out of pain. I mean, that's problematic. So for me, I think the conversation still leaves several questions about how we use the term Black. And as I say, I've taken recently to saying not obviously Black to define myself, so that it's a quick little phrase that helps people to understand that there's stuff going on, because of the experience primarily in the Netherlands. I never said that before I moved to the Netherlands, but it has been my experience in the Netherlands, and it's been necessary. And also within the world, I think things have changed. The conversation around being mixed has changed so drastically in my lifetime that not obviously Black is the only way I can find to define myself at the moment, because I can't my head round some of these other things because they come at too high a price, if you ask me. Let's just say
that. Okay.
But yes, I think it's interesting. I do feel for Dr. Raquel, who had the original discussion. It upset me quite a lot because I just felt like, here is an obviously Black woman. She has had the experience of being obviously Black her whole life. Whether she wants to hold her mixedness or not, and she is of mixed Caribbean origin, so of course that I understood very quickly and could identify with. And regardless, her community is saying we wouldn't support her, full stop. Not because she is anti-Black, by the way, not because she's against Black people. She's not Candace Owens or anything like that. She's not those kinds of people, right? She's not in that category of person, as far as I could tell. I don't know, maybe there's evidence to say she is, but purely based on the fact that there is white in her. When in fact, when most children of the diaspora, African people across the entire diaspora, do any kind of DNA test, find one that doesn't, right? Even no matter which color spectrum you come on, because of the nature and the devastation that was caused, everybody has something else in them because of that mix, because of that horrendous criminal actions of slavery. That has required that. But because hers is one that you can see in modern times, you can turn around and say that her experience is nullified, no matter, even if she is pro, even if she promotes whatever she's promoting, it would not be valid. And I think that's painful. That's painful.
Yeah, look, I said, I acknowledge, that some of my views are a bit out there and challenging, and we still haven't done the dark side of nations.
We still haven't done the dark side of oh my gosh, y'all should hear him talk on nations. Oh my goodness me, this will just freak you out. It's crazy. Somebody said, when are we going to do the dark side of the racism in the Netherlands one? Yeah, that's
hey, listen, 5 December is upon us. So
listen, Lord help us. No, but let me give props. Now. 5 December is upon us, which is the notoriously racist holiday here in the Netherlands. However, they're going on a journey. And our local supermarket, who was adamant that they would have their little blackface gollywogs, has brown, actual normal looking things.
They look more like normal
humans. They look like humans. Yeah. I was shocked to see humans in the store.
Yeah.
Props, man. I was like, oh, look, they look human. That's amazing. Listen, you have to take your steps. Actually, if you don't know about 5 December, if you've not been around our show for the last few years, you have not watched The Dark Side around December. 5 December is coming in the Netherlands. 5 December, man. Sinterklaas and Zwarte Piet. Yes.
Yeah. So, look, yeah. I know some of my views might be a bit out there for some people. But yeah, I'm sorry, I just don't see the world in that in the way that I put a lot of value in these things. And I don't see these things. I recognize the ability of systems to define me or to seek to impose their definition on me. And I am in a constant state of rebellion against it.
And when he says constant, he does mean constant. I kid you not. If there is an opportunity to rebel against that system, oh, let me tell you, he will take it. Which is why we have to be careful where we live. Okay, so Outhouse Ministries have asked, what's the account called? Is it published? Bermuda Slade. So the account that you were speaking of
yeah, I believe it was the first book, First Slave.
Let's do this.
Printed
You will find
in
it.
the UK. I believe it's called The Story or the History of Mary Prince.
Okay. The one I found is The Interesting Narrative of the Life of Oluwada Equiano or Gustavus Vassa, depending on what you've said. So there's a boy one. So you're talking about a girl one, which may be different.
Mary Prince. As I said, I believe it's the first one published in
what
the
he'll
UK.
do
Definitely.
is when he finds it, he will send it to me and I will put it up on the Pastor Purple
apology.
Well, apology. Yeah, apologizing for nothing. He's telling you straight that he's just different. Like, that, no apology. Hey! Trust me, there's no apology there. He look in face. He don't apologize for nothing.
Listen, if I were to start to tell you my thoughts on apology, yeah, it'll be one of those things where the TV cuts off, yeah? The black screen. Like,
just Brendan.
apology. You
Broadcast.
can get an apology from these black screen. That'll be black screen.
Yeah, well, I think it's, do you know what? I think it's good to have the constant rebellion against, and you see that with abolition work across the globe. Abolitionists are the constant rebellion against, and maybe that's really something that you fall into the category of being an abolitionist, because I think that really defines your rebellion against the system. I think for me, I try to find ways of celebrating my identity within that, but also being mindful of the experience, the lived daily experience of people who look very different from me, but who are also my kin, because the lived daily experience of my mother was very different than my lived daily experience, and is very different than my children's lived, and yours, and Wesley's, since we used him as an example today. And so to find our identity within that, I think is just really tough. And I think that I'm glad that people watched today. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for taking part in the discussion. As I said, this won't be the first time or the last time we talk about the construction that is Black. But I think if you took anything away from this discussion, what I hope is that you took is that Black isn't a monolith. There's no one defining characteristic that's going to, we're not all going to think and feel exactly the same way about our Black identity. And in some ways that's because it stands in opposition to what is a construction of whiteness that we disagree with. So maybe that's a takeaway. You look like you're ready to jump in and say and or but.
Or maybe all of them.
Like I said, there's no one defining thing there.
Yeah. Look, no, listen, yes. Okay.
It's not one defining thing. No, you're so hilarious.
It's not one defining thing. Absolutely. It's not one defining thing. Yeah. I don't disagree with that.
He's trying desperately not to disagree with that. That's what he's trying.
No. I agree. I agree that it is not one defining thing. That
it's not Black is not a monolith. We don't all feel and breathe the same.
No, we don't.
No.
But that's because we're human before we're Black.
Right.
And then we'd have a national identity before we're Black. And we'd be a lot of other things before we're Black. So it could never be a monolith. And once again, we don't get to define for ourselves. And so there's a whole bunch of things. So yes, you're absolutely right. Yeah.
Well, folks, thank you for coming and joining us here on the dark side. We were really happy that you're with us, that you stick these conversations out.
I just want to answer House's question. At what point do they classify rebellion against the system as innovation? Rebellion against the system is not innovation. When you have answers for the system, that's when you have innovation. The system is perfectly equipped to deal with rebellion. They will suppress it. But the moment you're able to provide answers that undercut and do a better job than the existing system, that's where you have innovation. So in order to have innovation, it's not just a question of being rebellious, it's also a matter of having answers. And once again, ask me a question. I've got some interesting answers. I've got some interesting answers for you. And so,
depends on the question.
Yeah.
Well, we thank you for joining us here on the dark side. There are some of you that have sent me news stories in the past weeks, which I know that we haven't got to yet. That's not because I'm ignoring you, it's because there's been a lot happening. So I'm hoping that I can get to some of these news stories. For example, the Dutch government have recently issued an apology over slavery. It's coming up to the centenary here of the abolition of slavery. And there's a big celebration that will be happening within the next year. There's lots of books being released. There's lots of work being done. And so I know that's happening. And other news stories that have been given, like there was a story of the visas being waived for the Caribbean country since Brexit. Wonder why they did that. So we got sent that news story as well. So there's a number of news stories. We haven't missed you. We haven't forgotten you. We are working on them. Please keep sending along your ideas and interests. We actually really just enjoy sharing that with others and having the conversation and doing the educational work that goes with it. So there you go. Just to remind you. To that end, please like, share, comment, and continue the conversation here on the dark side. Thank you very much, Mr. Storm. Peace out.
Yeah, well, in honor of tonight's show, to my brothers and sisters out there, yeah.
Good night, everyone. Have a good one. If you're watching this on playback, thank you for watching us. All the best. Bye-bye.